Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Faten Al-Shazli, founder and chief creative officer of We As Them, and the vice chair of the Halifax Chamber Board of Directors. I'd like to start by thanking our presenting sponsor and a dear friend of We As Them, the Rowe School of Business and the Faculty of Management at Dalhousie University. And of course, thank you to our host partner today, Cox & Palmer. We have been planning this event with them for months, and we are thrilled to share with you all the incredible opportunities in our growing oceans industry. With 70% of Nova Scotia's population living in coastal communities, it is no surprise that our oceans industry is thriving and gaining global attention. Over 13,000 kilometers of coastline provide opportunities in post-secondary education, ocean tech, ocean research, and so much more. As an organization representing the interests of the business community here in Halifax, we thought it was important to share with our members today how we can all benefit from the success happening in the ocean sector. It is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today, Jeff Larson. Jeff is the Assistant Vice President with Innovation and Entrepreneurship and the Adjunct Professor in the Faculty of Management at Dalhousie University. Jeff is also the site lead at the Atlantic Creative Destruction Lab. Welcome, Jeff. Over to you.
Thanks so much. I'm just going to share my screen and go through a few slides that I hope will help set the stage of why this is such a big opportunity. So I didn't know what to call this. Halifax, an ocean of opportunity, or Canada's ocean city. So I included both. You're probably familiar with our growing Halifax Innovation District, this intense concentration in downtown Halifax and Dartmouth of ocean tech opportunities. And now, even with the pandemic, we're seeing an increasing focus on tech talent wanting to move to cities the size of Halifax. We're close to the ocean. It's a livable city. People don't want to be in Silicon Valley anymore. And we're seeing results. We've had almost 10 billion in startup exits in the last 10 years. In the last year, we've had several what we call unicorns, which are billion-dollar companies. The largest acquisition in Canadian history was Verafin, a Newfoundland company acquired for over $2 billion US by the NASDAQ. That was an all-cash deal. We're ranked as the top 15 ecosystem in the world for bang for your buck, which is a measurement of venture capital divided by the cost of technical talent. And we're the fourth fastest growing startup ecosystem amongst emerging ones in the world. And people are surprised to see that we're 36th in the world for venture capital raised per capita. Now, this is starting to really translate into the ocean, and the ocean is changing dramatically. On the left, you'll see traditional aquaculture. On the right is the new offshore aquaculture opportunities, which are more sustainable. This is how we're going to sustainably provide protein to the planet. So you can see the difference in tech. This is traditional shipping. This is autonomous shipping, electrified shipping. The company on the left is one of our CDL companies, Exocean. They're building their vessels now in Lunenburg. This is traditional energy, which will still play a role, but this is the future, tidal and offshore wind, creating tremendous high-tech opportunities. All of this relates to underwater acoustics, sensing, marine communications, wireless networks and sensors, robotics. And in the harshest environment, it's harder to work in the ocean than on the moon in outer space. These are some of the industries being disrupted, and you're seeing some of the key things that are happening, like at the Halifax shipyard. Our ocean cluster builds on all of these assets. We have amongst the highest concentration of PhDs in the world in ocean areas. We have assets in Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, a deep concentration of technical expertise. We have something which my colleague Catherine will talk a bit about, which is one of the largest ocean research projects in the world, the Ocean Frontier Institute, a partnership between Memorial, Dalhousie, and UPI. Deep Sense, which Jennifer talks about, which is AI in the ocean world. We have Melanie here with the COVE, the Center for Ocean Ventures and Entrepreneurship. We have a new project to create more and better startups, partnership between CDL, Genesis in Newfoundland, Innovacore, NBIF, and so on, creating all kinds of new ocean tech startups and supporting the scale-ups in our ocean tech sector. We have an Ocean Startup Challenge for new companies, Lab to Market, which is taking PhDs and experts and trying to help them understand the customer opportunities of their research, and our CDL Atlantic Ocean Stream. So what's CDL? CDL is a global network now. We have 5 locations in Canada, one at Dalhousie, which focuses on ocean tech, with also locations at Oxford, Georgia Tech, University of Washington, Seattle. Risley says it's the initiative that he thinks will have the biggest impact on the Atlantic Canadian economy. And really our mission is to help commercialize science for the betterment of humankind. In the last 10 years, we've created $8 billion in equity value. We've only been doing it in Nova Scotia, in Atlantic Canada for 4 years, and we've just surpassed about $500 million in equity value. That's a 5-time multiplier in equity raised. And I'm going to skip through a couple of these because we're running out of time. One of the key things we do through this is we take existing startups, mentors, they go through an intensive mentorship program over 10 months. And we have our MBA students at the Rowe School of Business, and we extend that to the other business schools in Atlantic Canada as well to participate. And they get to see real time how our mentors like John Risley and Chris Huskelson and Melanie Nadeau and others are interacting with the startups. And so it's really experiential learning for them. We focused on the intersection of essentially deep technology, AI, automation, with sustainability imperatives and new shifting demand in trade routes, in protein demand, and so on. So it's a really exciting program. Some of the companies we've seen, we're going to post some videos of them, but they're autonomous shipping vehicles, marine robotics, and concrete is a new kind of material that ports can use that marine organisms grow on instead of traditional concrete. Safety networks on reducing technology to reduce bycatch and fishing nets, and on and on and on. So we're quite excited about how ocean tech is really amplifying the opportunity of the Halifax Innovation District, the Atlantic Canadian economy, and really the economy of Canada as a whole. Currently, the ocean economy is $1.5 trillion, and it's expected to double in the next 10 years, according to the OECD. So as you can tell, there is an ocean of opportunity. With that, I'm going to introduce my panelists, which are a very esteemed group who are at the heart of everything that's happening here. Jennifer LaPlante is Executive Director of DeepSense, an organization focused on driving economic growth through increased comprehension and adoption of AI in the Canadian ocean sector. She holds an MBA and an MSc in Computing and Data Analytics. And last year, Jennifer was named one of Data IQ 2021's top 100 influential people in AI globally. Catherine Blewett is Chief Strategic Engagement Officer for the Ocean Frontier Institute. She was formerly the Chief Deputy of the province of Nova Scotia, which is the highest civil service position, and the Deputy Clerk of the Privy Council and Associate Director to Prime Minister Trudeau's cabinet, which is, I believe, the second most senior position in the federal civil service, and brings a wealth of expertise to OFI. She's now Canada's representative to the International High-Level Panel for a Sustainable Ocean Economy. Melanie Nadeau is the CEO of the Center for Ocean Ventures and Entrepreneurship. She specializes in aligning people, communities, and opportunities to foster innovation and drive ocean technology to market. Previously, she worked in the Royal Canadian Navy, as well as in strategic planning, operations, and stakeholder relations for a variety of different companies and international organizations. Has been a notable expert for the International Energy Agency, the UN Environmental Program, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Welcome, panelists, and I'd like to start by asking each of you to briefly share about the work you're doing at your institution. So we'll start with Jennifer.
Thanks very much. And to your introduction, Jeff, one of the biggest things that we do at DeepSense is we help companies understand AI. The biggest thing that's most important to us is we have incredible funding partners, ACOA, the province of Nova Scotia, COVE, Ocean Frontier Institute, and then IBM. We own infrastructure that helps people make AI. AI is complicated and tricky and hard to do, and most people don't know how, and companies don't know how. So we partner those companies with students, and we help them build out things that can be really complex and challenging. And the beautiful part of this is the world's only learning how AI can benefit. So we're helping companies understand how to benefit. At the same time, though, in Atlantic Canada, we're having students who are graduating who understand AI and see the ocean as a real opportunity for their career in the future. So we do some really interesting things, and we get a chance to meet many of those great companies you just mentioned. And it really is a massive ocean of opportunity.
Jennifer, before I go on, just I've heard AI described as a whole bunch of data can help us do more and better prediction. Can you just describe for people who may have less experience with AI, what it means practically for a business and how that applies to the ocean?
Great question. So AI in theory actually is almost like the word Kleenex and tissue. Not every tissue is a Kleenex, right? But every Kleenex is a tissue. So AI is very much an umbrella piece where it's essentially getting a computer to do something for you without human intervention. And so maybe if you have an if-then statement, you had an out of office, something was programmed, you could consider that AI. A lot of the times the AI we're talking about is really complex computation that happens that a human could never do. And it takes a lot for a computer to do it, and it takes a pile of data to do it. So I'll sometimes use both language, but a lot of times we're talking really deep technical AI.
Great. Catherine.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeff. And I want to give a real shout out to the Chamber. Thank you, Fitin, and the sponsors today for convening the session to understand really the significance of the ocean opportunity in front of us. I do feel very lucky to share this panel with two amazing women who are both real influencers in this space and who are going to help mobilize the opportunities. I just want to pause for a second and talk about the backbone of this economy. It is the ocean. From a climate perspective, the ocean absolutely is the backbone of the planet, and without doubt is going to be the future path for climate solutions, but it's also the next economic frontier. Honestly, at the moment, we know more about space than we do about the ocean, and the economic opportunities that are going to come from that are going to be enormous. I do want to say, and I'll be a bit candid, my frank assessment is that many countries are ahead of Canada in terms of recognizing the potential and really maximizing the opportunities that a blue economy provides. I've seen it firsthand internationally. Other countries are out focusing on ocean health, wealth, ocean knowledge, and the considerations around ocean equity and finance. But look, the real upside for Nova Scotia, for the region, and frankly, for our country is we're so well positioned with the ocean infrastructure that we have. Jeff, you set out that innovation hub map. So we're seeing it all, right? We've got clusters of institutions, tech hubs, entrepreneurial support, and a growing and diverse base of ocean industries. The Ocean Frontier Institute, our researchers number among the best in the world in ocean science. And we are delivering really interesting and innovative research and industry partnerships. You talked about the exodus from Silicon Valley and what people really want. I want to talk a little bit about OFI. We're really focused on the global ambition in the issues that are on the cutting edge for the ocean, issues like deep sea mining, the Atlantification of the Arctic, and the real impact that the changing ocean carbon sink is having on climate. We'll have a chance, hopefully, to talk a little bit about that. I'm really looking forward to the discussion and talking about how we bring all the influences to bear: international policymakers, scientists, environmentalists, and technology partners and companies. Thanks so much.
That was great, Catherine. And I think it's a really great point. In our innovation ecosystem, we definitely want to encourage all sectors to excel and thrive. But if we're going to be best in something, ocean is definitely something where we have a ton of assets, but we're not the only ones. Norway's ocean economy is 10 times ours, and their population is a 10th of ours. And if we really want to compete and win, we have to amp up our ambition. And I'm really interested in talking more about the climate aspects of the ocean. Maybe you could just give us a couple sentences as a prelude to that about how important the ocean is as to the climate change, both as a carbon sink and how it's being affected by climate change, and we can dig in a little bit later.
Perfect. So the ocean is the biggest carbon sink on the planet. So when you imagine any carbon price regime, any carbon formula, any net zero ambitions, they're actually based on terrestrial calculations at the moment. It's kind of like, and half the equation is missing, and potentially the math is not quite correct at the moment. So the opportunity in the ocean is to actually measure, monitor, understand what's happening with the changes in ocean carbon. It's wild, right? So for the first time in recorded human history, there's rain in Greenland above the ice sheets. That is changing the chemistry, the biology of the ocean. It's got real implications for the planet, but boy, oh boy, the opportunities are startling, and they're actually going to truly be globally changing. So it's going to be a great discussion. Thanks.
Melanie.
Great, thank you, Jeff, and thank you for the Chamber to inviting me. And it's always a great fun to have conversations with champions of the ocean like Jennifer and Catherine. As you saw, as Catherine was speaking, I was nodding my head several times. So a couple of things I think before I just talk a little bit about Cove. One thing that we know is that sustainable ocean-based economies are growing faster than anywhere else. So we're so rightly positioned here to be part of that global growth that we talk about. And why is that happening? Because you know, there's so much economic growth in the fisheries sector, in transportation, and so on. And the other thing that I always think about, sometimes we say, well, we're just Nova Scotia or we're just Atlantic Canada, but the ocean is global. So whether it's the Atlantic or the Baltic Sea, we're connected. So we have to look at it as a global resource and not just a local one. So I think that's always important. And also when you think about the subsectors within the ocean sector, so anything from marine tourism to transportation, again, they're very intertwined. Fisheries and offshore energy, very intertwined as well. So it's a very interconnected space to be working in. And when you think about sustainability of the oceans, why do we care? Catherine very eloquently said why we need to care, but there are other reasons. 80% of the economy is transported on the ocean through seas. Very important, so as a transportation corridor. 15 to 20% of our animal protein comes from the ocean. So we need to be thinking about how we're using the ocean, how we're not being wasteful in our processing and our manufacturing and so on. So, and of course, there's big importance in people that live around coasts. So we need to pay attention to how the ocean is impacting climate change, and it's how it's enabling us to manage through cycles of climate change. And then the other point that I think is really important, Jeff, you said, the OECD and other international organizations have said this economy is going to double in the next 10 years to over 3 trillion US. It's alarming because we know there's this big challenge before us, but how do you get there? I think is really the big question. And so, you know, there are more pieces to this than that, but there definitely needs to be capital deployed, so financing in this sector to be able to get to that 2030 target. There also needs to be a lot of innovation. So the ability to drive innovation to create this sustainable ocean economy is really important, and the need for fostering that innovation. And I was glad to see all the work that's happening in this market to enable that fostering of innovation. So a little bit about Cove. We're in the 3rd year of our doors being open. We're really at the heart of the ocean tech ecosystem in Canada. We have a working waterfront that's here. We have collaborative space. We have workshops, machine shops. We're very focused on bringing research, business, and technology to market. And our main mandate is on commercialization. So that means how do we get new products and services in the oceans quicker to market? So that's our real driver. We also have several programs. So we have programs focused on shared infrastructure to get tech to market. And I'm really excited to share that we're finishing the commissioning of Stella Mars, which is the first subsea sensor platform that's developed in the Atlantic as a plug and play. So, and now we have 16 different technologies that are on that platform. So that's really exciting. We also focus on programming for workforce, which again, we're very focused on understanding the whole talent pipeline. So everything from youth, where are youth not going into this sector, or how do we get them there, to professionals. So that's another important piece in enabling this market. Today, we have about 60 companies that are actual residents at Cove, and that includes everything from startups, which sit in our incubator space, the Cove Startup Yard, to SMEs and multinationals. And these companies, on site today, we have about 300 people or so that are consistently on site, but these companies have operations in Europe, they have operations in Ontario, in BC, in the US. So the reach is much bigger than, the footprint that we have here. And the other thing that's really interesting, to go to that global message, what we're experiencing is that we've got about 40, 45 companies right now from Ontario, from British Columbia, from other spots in Nova Scotia, from Europe, the European market, that are really interested in coming to Cove, but coming to this market. And that's just a show of this ecosystem is getting stronger and stronger, and the world is paying attention. So I think that's really important for us to leverage. And also in that space, to the earlier point, we're really striving to be a global center of excellence. And I was really excited. A couple of weeks ago, we signed a memorandum, a strategic partnership for us with like-minded organizations. And that's with leaders in Germany and leaders in Norway. And we're starting to work through that and starting to have those conversations on how we're going to bring that partnership and scale it. And that allows us to get into other markets, to learn from others that are doing similar things to us. And in fact, the other interesting thing is they're asking us and trying to learn from us. So that's a really good indication that we're doing something right here at a global level. But needless to say, the challenges are still there, and the opportunity is really there. And that's really what I'm very interested in having the conversation on, is how do we grasp that even more than we have today?
Great. Thanks so much. Jennifer, certainly AI being applied in the ocean sector is one of the biggest innovations in the ocean industry over the last 10 years. Can you describe some of the practical applications of AI in the ocean industry and why it's such a big innovation, the impact it's making?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest things first is that we're able to collect more data at a lower cost for storage and at a lower cost for the data collection than ever before, which means if someone wanted to put a sensor in water historically to collect information about that environment, they would have been capped at the amount of data they could capture and the cost of that, the battery life. We're now at the point where we can collect vast amounts of information and store it. So this means that we have the opportunity to go and analyze data to understand the movement and patterns of mammals. We can understand the climate and the situation of certain locations to move to add aquaculture sites. So there's a bunch of different analysis that's required to prove that these are safe places, that we're okay putting a bunch of fish and some pens there. Well, now we can actually analyze lots of data and optimize that without having very specific, tailored, skilled people to do that work. Different things too in terms of the autonomous system. So IBM is working with their partner, and they're sending the first autonomous vessel called the Mayflower across the Atlantic autonomously. And this would never have been available before AI, because it's kind of like a Tesla driving down the street. It needs to know that it can keep going forward. It needs to know the wind speeds, the wave heights, its direction. All of this is due to a bunch of different models being developed and trained based on all sorts of inputs and information. And a human, we don't want to rely on a human to make these decisions. We want the system to do it itself. We're also working through things using images. So collecting data about underwater pipes. We know oil and gas is going to be here in the future for now. That is definitely part of what's still required. How do we make sure that all of the infrastructure that's there is still functioning and operating the best? So there's opportunities to collect information like images of underwater pipes. And then instead of having to dive or manually go through and inspect, we can collect information over time and analyze. There's mapping of the seabed floor. We don't have any images and know what's underwater. So there's one incredible OFI project that's working with Kraken Robotics on mapping 20,000 square kilometers of the ocean floor. And part of that is actually students that I work with scrubbing the internet to find images of what those other images people have done on dives and label those images, actually build out models so we can know what this image is underwater. What is it? Is this a log? Is this a crab? All of that takes human effort first, but we can scale it up with the AI. And one last thing is that's fascinating about AI is we're using everything from text data to images. So we can use satellite images and make predictions around what's actually happening on the surface or of water and the movements of boats. And we're collecting lots of data underwater, and we can use AI to optimize those. One last one that's super important too is AI can be done in lots of different types of data. So you can use images, and I use the example of text. We can use lots of really interesting text data that's never been analyzed before as well. So if we're trying to look for information about optimizing shipping or optimizing movement of goods and patterns, there's lots of ways that we can go and remove humans from all of the manual effort of trying to optimize these systems, take them and deploy them on more important tasks, and have systems run things faster and move things around. Can you get a ship here faster through customs? Can you execute projects faster and have reporting to the Department of Fisheries and Oceans faster so we can overcome some of those barriers that I might have from a regulatory standpoint? There's all of these different applications that can make us move a little quicker and faster to have from an aquaculture to logistics to military and defense.
I'm just going to, there's something that we've talked a lot about, Jennifer, that's an innovation unrelated to the technology, which is the data sharing, right? So if you have people in the military, fishing vessels, scientists sharing data, and then we can optimize, for example, where climate change is shifting fish migration so that we can, reduce the fuel and time associated with offshore fishing opportunities. That's something you couldn't do just with AI either. The data sharing allows that to happen. Can you describe that process and how people collaborate as an innovation?
Absolutely. And I think, Catherine kind of alluded to sometimes we're a little bit behind. This is one of those areas where we can sometimes be behind. Sometimes government bodies don't want to share. So it's all about trying to have those open doors. And one of those things where people get a little protective. If they collect data, they think if I share it with you, maybe you're going to find something I didn't know was out there. So they're afraid to share because maybe they're going to miss an opportunity. And this is part of, there's a lot of incredible projects that are happening through the supercluster and others where we're starting to bring private and public together to help take that data and that information and make it more valuable, because there's tons of data out there. And we often say we have lots and lots of data, we can do interesting things, but maybe it's not the right data. So maybe somebody else has the right data. So let's say I wanted to I use aquaculture. I wanted to put an aquaculture site in a location, but maybe the data I have is 5 miles away, and that's not sufficient. Maybe somebody else has information that can help me make those decisions because it's closer, and we just have to find those collaborations and sharing. And I think this is part of the whole recognition that this is something we need to do collectively, and people kind of need to put their guards down and be happy to continue to collaborate.
I often like to say that there's, I think Malcolm Gladwell pointed out the myth of David versus Goliath, right? That the little person wins against the big person by going head to head. And the reality is throughout history, it's been by the little person collaborating with a bunch of other little people. And if we want to compete and win globally in Atlantic Canada, collaboration is key. Catherine, one of the things that we've been fortunate enough in Halifax is to be the home of Carbon Cure, which takes carbon dioxide and re-injects it into the concrete process. And they won the Global X Prize recently. And there's a current Global X Prize on that Elon Musk is sponsoring on carbon capture. And I'm actually really happy that CDL has signed on with Ocean Visions and X Prize to support ocean-based technology in that process. And as you mentioned, where the oceans are the largest carbon sink. But what do we really need to know and understand about the role of the ocean to maximize its opportunity? Jennifer's talked a lot about great opportunities to be more efficient and to respond to climate change. but there's this massive opportunity also that in just kind of our role in fighting climate change around the ocean. And then that also leads to economic opportunities like carbon cure. So can you maybe just describe a bit from Ocean Frontiers perspective, how you see that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Jeff. So again, the North Atlantic Ocean, as it happens, is the largest, deepest carbon sink on the planet. And so again, for the last 200 years, this ocean has been, it's like a giant sponge actually, pulling in fossil fuel emissions and holding them in the deep, deep ocean. So as the dynamics, as the chemistry of the biology changes as a result of a lot of freshwater melt coming down, that changes. And the relationship, and I'll say as a disclaimer, I'm a political scientist, not an ocean scientist, and please don't write in all of a sudden. But, you know, it's the relationship between the atmosphere and the ocean, right? And the ability of the ocean to continue to be that sponge and hang on to all those emissions, if that tilts to become a net emitter, frankly, that's the ball game. You know, it's unbelievable when you think of that every second breath that people take is from the ocean. It's actually, even forests are net emitters. So there's a real fundamental science challenge. However, huge opportunities. You talk about carbon cure and the opportunity to sequester and store ocean carbon. What we need is a bit of a baseline, right? Because if there are these brilliant, smart companies that are out there, I do think the opportunities are really important, but how do we measure how effective they are? For like philanthropists and big investors will want to invest in a technology that moves the needle, but you actually have to know what the baseline is right now, because the rate and status of the ocean carbon actually is not terrifically quantified. So how do we know if this technology is better or worse? I was talking with colleagues the other day, said it's great how much funding's going into, you know, we saw a lot of clean tech funds, for example, just lit up, but is that funding going in the right place? Well, there's a real argument to look at making sure that there's a strong funnel of support to align ocean tech, because that baseline is going to save the planet, but it's also going to truly make some of our tiny companies more global leaders. It's tremendous opportunity.
Yeah, you're right about measuring it. So the X Prize for carbon removal that Elon Musk is funding is $100 million prize, the largest X Prize ever. And to win the prize, you need to demonstrate a working solution at scale of at least 1,000 tons removed per year and model their costs at a scale of 1 million tons per year.
Right.
How can you do that if you can't measure it?
Exactly. That's precisely it. And that's, you know, even that piece of work. And one of the things we are truly trying to do, and again, OFI, we are privileged to be located in Halifax, but we actually want to be an international catalyst. And we are starting to do some pretty important work with international governments and ocean influencers and opinion leaders. Everybody needs that baseline, and there's a global recognition of that. So why can't we set it here?
So I'm just going to pick up on that. Can you describe for people your international partners? As far as both the research institutions, and then, you know, you may not be able to get into all the other things that are happening, but just give a sense of the global role that OFI is providing from, you know, its headquarters in Halifax or Halifax and St. John's.
Okay, and listen, and I actually don't mind doing a bit of a commercial. So speaking about the ocean carbon piece and just how critical that is. So everybody would be watching after a federal election in Canada. You know, Glasgow will host COP in November, so that all the nations in the world coming to talk about where they stand vis-a-vis Paris targets and what their ambitions are and what they can actually achieve. So that is the epicenter of global climate policy. So OFI, we're actually standing up and kind of saying, you only have half the equation. and you need to get the math right. So in fact, October 1st, we are convening an international meeting, bringing together G7 environment ministers, bringing together international opinion leaders, environmental organizations from around the planet, philanthropists who are really focused on and want to invest in something that will be tangible in the ocean space. And Mark Carney is going to be with us throughout, and is actually, I think, going to, on behalf of OFI and this space, put out a global call to action. So that's pretty powerful. And again, this could be happening in Davos. I'm really happy it's happening in Halifax. So it builds the bona fides of the Institute, but it also really gives us an opportunity to showcase the industry, the tech capacity, and the entrepreneurial connections that we have. Jeff, the CDL piece is a game changer, and I agree with John. You know, this is our moment. It's an opportunity, and we all can collaborate. Again, these women on the screen, I'm pinching myself that we're all like, we're aligned, we're working together. It's collaborative. It's not competitive, and that's going to be the solution.
That's great. Melanie, building on this global theme, because you touched on it too, you know, we're building homegrown startups and scale ups and, you know, small, medium-sized companies, but we're also kind of collaborating with them and attracting them. And Cove is a big part of that. The new research capacity you have brings some technical capacity that doesn't exist anywhere in the world. We've had companies move from other global locations to be at Cove. Can you describe that a bit? Like how does the international component actually just make us stronger and make Halifax an even better place? Oh, you're on mute.
It's really interesting because, you know, we're still only in year 3. And, you know, I say we're bursting at the seams, but the truth of it is we are. And, you know, we've got these 40+ companies that want to come house here. And so it's really interesting in many ways. Some from our European markets are interested in coming through Cove because it's an access into North America. And it's at a spot where, you know, the truth is that collaboration is happening. So there is a collaboration between organizations, but what I see and I get really excited about is we're under one umbrella of competitive businesses. Some compete in the same markets, some, you know, compete for government programs, different dollars and so on. So there is an element of competition, and we, you know, that's good business. There has to be competition, but there's some collaboration within that competitiveness. And I think that's really attractive to companies when they're interested in coming to a new market and they're like, where do I even start? And they know it's, you know, I don't want to sound catchy here, but it's a bit of a safe zone. It's a safe zone because they can come here and start building those connections, and business opportunity after business opportunity is happening. And the good news, you know, some may not think this is the good news, but Cove, you know, is a broker of business. And I think of it as a broker of business. And we've seen so many business opportunities where we've been in the weeds. What I think is true success is we're sort of I'm seeing that happen, is that we're not in the middle. And that means that businesses to businesses are starting to generate that collaborative success and business opportunities without us being in the middle. But the fact that, you know, we have Cove, we have a larger ecosystem is attracting these very interesting companies, is attracting these, you know, investors. Or Mark Carney, that's amazing. These investors, these big fund managers are like, well, you know, what's happening over here? Why is there so much density? And I go back to, you know, these managers need investments. They need deal flow. They need a lot of activity, whether you're a VC or a balanced fund manager or whatever you are. They need a lot of activity in the market to be able to find their wins in their investment. And so the more density that we have, the more that those big fund managers start paying attention. And I think the other thing that's really I'm just going to say, and maybe it's not tied to your question, Jeff, but we've got to be okay with quick to win, or sorry, fast to fail. Be okay with failing. Really, that's what I'm trying to get across. Is that we've got companies that may, and especially in the ocean space, and takes so much experience and knowledge and capital. But we've got to be okay to say, okay, this company is not going to make it, and they're going to reinvent themselves, and that makes very, very strong ecosystems, and we get more and more of that in the ecosystem. And then you get these money managers starting to pay a lot of attention, and we know these big ESG funds are around the world. Mark Carney's leading one right now. They need to find deals. And is it clean tech? I think it's blue tech. There's no imperative that clean and blue are now so intertwined that they're going to be paying attention, because they have to find places where to put their money.
Yeah, that's interesting. A lot of people aren't aware of the size of Cuna del Mar, which Robert Orr is managing, a $200 million private equity fund focused on offshore aquaculture, with kind of the Walton family behind it. And a lot of the funds that are coming to CDL from France, Blue Ocean Partners and others. But what's interesting is there was relatively few focus on blue tech, but really blue tech is clean tech and climate tech, right? So, so do you think that the next stage, so you kind of described you're 3 years old now at Cove, the paint's still drying, and now you need probably to double your space. And then you got Stella Maris, that's an exciting kind of tech platform, the need for capital you just touched on. Like, what do you think is needed to put some jet fuel on the ocean opportunity? Like, what would work? What does Cove see as in the next 5 years going to really shoot you off even further?
Yeah, and this is much bigger than us, but I think what's really needed is that that true leadership vision in Canada and the world. So, there's a lot of efforts in the world to see the ocean and the blue economy as such a valuable opportunity. I think in Canada, we need to see that. We need to have that leadership in place and really believe that this is a global imperative and such an economic, environmental opportunity, and we go for it. And what that translates to is, you need government to be working with industry. So government is the one that regulates. They set the rules. They help to de-risk investment. So it's very important for them to work with industry, and industry is providing jobs. It's become global imperatives for industry because it's operational efficiencies, but it's also now financiers are saying, well, you can't have this much tonnage of waste in your seafood processing. Insurers are not okay with that. And so they know that they have to change, but it's not easy. This transformation is not easy. So I think, it's that really big sea collaboration and visioning that we need to really strongly believe that the opportunity is too great here and we can't pass it up. And I think Cove is part of that, of course, but that leadership is so important.
Well, I think we need to kind of go all in with our chips. And I think it's worthwhile, these jobs that are created through ocean tech, but also through upping the productivity and the value chain in traditional fishing and aquaculture industries. That's how we get to wages that help with affordable housing and create a better standard of living. So we need to go all in. And I think the collaboration, I like to say it takes an ecosystem to raise a startup, but even to be a global cluster that's world leading, we need to be collaborating. You touched on the role of government, and Catherine, I hope you don't mind me asking you a bit about this. I know you were deputy minister federally for fishing, and there has been some really interesting opportunities where government plays a leadership role. They're helping seed the super cluster. They have the Ocean Innovations Challenge. We see things like a startup that's at Cove that's working on netless fishing nets. Just describe how government can be a partner with industry and how you see that happening in the ocean economy, perhaps differently than others.
Yeah, perfect. And look, there are so many examples. I think back to when Canada, we hosted the G7, right? And we brought through oceans as one of our big themes. The Charlevoix Plastics Charter was a result of that. We actually launched the international focus on eliminating ghost gear. And what happens, you know, government is not going to do all of those things, but we actually set the frame, set the programming, and Melanie's precisely right about the regulatory context, but it is the private sector that moves in. You know, again, a good partner, Global Fishing Watch out of the UK, right? That company prospered as a result of policy change and some profile about what's important. And that's what government does, right? It focuses on what citizens want. And I think about, frankly, current discussions about climate change. That's where citizens are. So priorities change, but it actually is, it's companies, it's environmental organizations, it's civil society, it's Indigenous governance and Indigenous communities that jump in. So government will look to a solution space, and that's where I would say they're very interested in partnerships, and you know, hardworking colleagues. They also are very open to, so what's the answer? What is a unique and innovative way forward? I think about, you know, my goodness, I was privileged to work in the provincial system, and in the federal system, like the regulatory load is just like triple. And the system tries to review that, but there is space for innovation. And I think if we've got good relationships with government, they'll actually, you know, with belts and suspenders, a little bit of risk mitigation, I think we can bring strong government partnerships to bear. Money, everybody says, yeah, we won't talk about that, but it's important. And again, just, are we spending it in the right place? We've got the best business case I can possibly imagine to go forward in the blue tech space. So government will be there. It takes persistence, it takes clarity. And the other thing that happens, it takes, it's a big country. You've got British Columbia, you've got the Arctic, and you've got the Atlantic and the coastline. So it takes not being paternalistic or small p political, right? It will take some real, I'm trying to be super careful here. I have no idea how many people are watching, but it's going to take real nonpartisan effort to see what the opportunities are. And again, it's a global imperative for citizens' health, so it should be okay.
I just want to remind everyone, please put some questions in the Q&A, and we'll be coming to you in about 10 minutes. And there's one in there right now. So I expect at least 10 questions to be in there in the next 10 minutes. And if not, I'm going to find out who's on this, and I'm going to start calling you out individually. So I want to talk about talent. So, you know, the sense of what's happening, I think, in the innovation economy globally is that talent is the #1 ingredient that's needed. And where talent is, opportunities are going to emerge, or people are going to want to locate their company there. And I think with some work that was funded and supported by Irving Shipbuilding, Cove has spent a lot of time on the talent side of things. And then, you know, Jennifer, you're at the Faculty of Computer Science, and Catherine, you're also, you know, at the forefront of where the researchers are and the talent. So Melanie, can you maybe just kick us off a bit about talking about this? And you know, some of the origins of this were, if we're going to get our best talent engaged in the ocean economy, you know, we need to shift some of the perceptions that existed. And we need to start really early with showing people the excitement of autonomous boats and all of these things. So Why don't you just describe a bit about the talent space, Melanie, and then I'll go to Jennifer and Catherine.
Yeah, it's a great question because I always think of people first, and that's what creates success. So you need that talent in place. The work that we've done over the years is kind of alarming in the sense that, I mean, don't big alarms, but it's kind of alarming because we've done some baseline work where we've looked at youth, and youth is young people in grade school. And that's where they're starting to formulate their ideas around what they want to be when they grow up. What are their parents doing? You know, there's a lot of influencing that happens. What are their teachers saying? And our baseline showed, and this was a couple of years ago, for a very maritime oriented region, our baseline has shown in Atlantic Canada that these youth have thought of the ocean as a dirty type of work. It's going to be really tough. They think about it as, and again, you know, these are the views that we've got, like offshore oil and gas. Well, that's a sector I'm not really interested in that in my future. Fishing, that's really tough and whatnot. And so that's really the baseline of where we've, you know, sort of thought, okay, well, we need to change that view. We need to change how these young people are seeing the opportunities before them. So we've got a lot of programming around that for young people, and have done career profiles. We have mentorship programs. We have all kind of stuff that we've now delivered based on that baseline. But I think it was a really interesting baseline to understand. And so we do have a lot of work. And those are young people that, you know, they're going to be the people working or going to Dal or going to the NSCC and other institutes in the next 10 years. So we've got to get their attention. And so anyway, so that's something that's, you know, been pretty interesting. The other thing that I still get surprised of, and I think that's why it's so important to have places like Cove and working together is, you know, we hosted a group from Dalhousie, from the Ocean Tracking Network just 3 weeks ago. They were mostly scientists, and we had them spend time with a lot of companies. They spent time with us, all this kind of stuff. And a lot of the feedback was we never had any idea that there was so many variety in the types of jobs in ocean tech. And so, you know, the traditional science-based marine science or biology, like, you know, they see maybe they go work for DFO or they go work for elsewhere, but all of a sudden they can be working for a company, and it's very, very different. And I think those opportunities, we have to grasp them as much as we can, because we're opening their minds to so many different careers, so many different choices. And so that's really what our focus on is presenting youth in part with these different perceptions of what careers could look like for them, even though when they're starting in grade 6 to when they're in post-secondary, and they're trying to figure out what they're going to do as their next steps when they try to land a job.
Jennifer, so Faculty of Computer Science is where you're based, right? So
Yes.
You're not in the faculty of oceanography or anything like that. And this faculty, just to give people a sense, 5 years ago had 1,000 students and now has more than 2,000 students, right? And that's largely now constrained by the size of our building and things like that. Yeah. But you know, embedded now in the faculty is the largest research center is in ocean tech. And how are you engaging with, you know, students' interest in technology that perhaps have not been seen the ocean as an opportunity? And what's the results? How are they getting excited? What are they learning?
Well, I think one big thing is we partner with any academic institution in Atlantic Canada. So we're Dalhousie focused, but all of the other institutions. And one of the most critical things to Canada in general is immigration. What is most surprising is the majority of students, especially once you hit a master's and PhD level, are not from Canada. They're new to Canada. The likelihood of them having been near the ocean or having seen the ocean is very low. And we worked on one really interesting project quickly with Cove about predicting the wind speed and wave height in the Halifax Harbor. So there's a buoy that could be a single point of failure. Is it safe enough for a pilot captain to climb up the side of the boat, or is there enough clearance for the vessel to come into the harbor? And the student that worked on that was from Nigeria and didn't necessarily have any exposure to the ocean, awareness of ocean data, didn't know about the domain. And so one of the big things we're really focusing on teaching students, not just about the companies and the opportunity, but then also how that data looks. What does it look like? And we're trying to mentor students and show them lots of examples. And so as many students as we can bring into the fold is really critical, because we want those students to stay here when they graduate. And partnerships through things like what they have at Cove, where students get a chance to do internships with these companies, is fundamentally important. Hackathons and other events are really critical because the students learn a little, their curiosity is piqued, and then hopefully they want to stay and help grow the companies we're trying to grow here.
And Catherine, I know that one of OFI's great projects has been a partnership with the National Film Board to create Ocean School.
Exactly.
Somebody please put in the chat a link to that, but that's introducing, well, I'll have you describe it. And then you work a lot with graduate students, and we have a partnership with you around something called Lab to Market Oceans, and then all the other things. So how is OFI amplifying the ocean talent and really creating that next generation of people who are at the forefront of both the science but understand the practical implications?
Well, great question, and thank you. And just building on Melanie's premise about, we've got to grab people young and get them interested. So Ocean School is a phenomenal project through, and I see MJ, thanks for putting it in the chat. It is an ocean literacy tool that's having phenomenal success across Canada, and actually now being pulled into the curriculum into the States. So it does in sort of grade level and appropriate context, bring the very cool opportunities, stories, science, impact to students in school. So, and Boris Worm is our champion and our ambassador, and that collaboration with NFB, it's on fire, and it's going to, again, start telling stories that just reinforce all of the great work we're doing.
Nice.
So,
Catherine, just might be right that I think Nova Scotia implemented it into its junior high curriculum as kind of like the kickoff for it, and now it's exploding.
Yeah, and again, back to how can government help? Recognize something that's interesting, take a chance on a pilot, and then it goes, right? And it's extraordinarily successful. The Ocean Frontier Institute, the other thing that we do, of course, we are side by side. We are, our strength is our researchers. And the opportunity as folks get into post-secondary education is to connect students with researchers, and those researchers with companies. So again, they're not thinking about a career in the ocean is working on a fishing trawler. Actually, it is, high tech, nanotech, super computing work that influences global shipping, for example, seeing themselves in the sector. So one of the things we've done, actually, we have, as a result of some of our research projects, we've actually probably created 35 small companies. Students, researchers, we kind of bring the researchers out of the ivory tower a little bit, rub them up with industry, and the innovation that happens is phenomenal, and students can be part of it. So we've got a program called OGen, and we bring students in, link them up, and fund a pretty phenomenal experience. Lab to Market is another fabulous collaboration. And so again, it's interesting, Jeff, we have been seeing the expansion in, and I'll say it's sort of that training piece. And again, it's not, doesn't need to be competitive, right? Because everybody finds their niche, and think about how different every student is, and what will appeal to one won't appeal to another. The key for us is just having a touch point at some level. And again, our reach, Eric Siegel is our colleague working with you and with us, and he's doing fabulous work to help us connect. So we're truly hopeful.
We're going to move to the Q&A, but just before that, just staying on talent, and I see in the list of attendees here is probably all of our good friend Chris Gugu with Ulnawag. And Melanie and then Catherine, can you maybe just briefly talk about some of the work you're doing with our Indigenous communities to kind of make sure that talent is, that we can reach that talent and it's inclusive of an opportunity as possible. Melanie and then Catherine.
Hi, Chris. Good to know that you're joining. So there's really a couple of really exciting things that we've done in this space. One is that we've got resident Indigenous-led companies at Cove. So that's very exciting in the ocean tech space that are here on a regular basis. So I interact with them frequently. I think the other big thing that we've announced is this partnership with Yunawag and Upswing Solutions called Simquinesque. And that's about getting high-tech, innovative, Indigenous-led companies in the aquaculture and fisheries space to be moving the dial, moving the needle in their businesses. And so that's just a start of what I see as a really big relationship. And that's tied to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which again, as far as we're aware, is a world first, where we're working with Indigenous-led businesses in the ocean sector and focus on SDG goals. So I think there's going to be a lot of interest and attraction as we're going through that project. So it's a really neat partnership. And then through our workforce programming, we're really engaged on right now, really trying to get more community involvement with young people and older people and bring their knowledge to this sector. So we know that, you know, Indigenous peoples have a long-standing relationship with the ocean. And so there's so much there to contribute. So there's a great learning opportunity for us. And so we're doing some work now on workforce development where we're trying to open that dialogue a lot more so that we can all learn and see what bigger impact we could have from a business point of view.
Great. Catherine, you can wrap up this portion and we'll go to the Q&A. So.
Well, that sounds perfect. And Jeff, you've got an awesome panel here because I want to talk about another world first that we know about. So OFI, the relationship with our Indigenous peoples is incredibly important. And one of the things that OFI has done, which is now nested in the UN best practices, is a guide for researchers in terms of engaging with Indigenous communities who reside in the communities and touch our oceans and our coastlines. So it's a really excellent piece of work. It took many years because we were very careful and we wanted to make sure that we co-developed the guide. And that was an awesome process. And OFI is continuing on in our organization. Actually, having Indigenous awareness training and engagement is mandatory for our researchers to make sure we've got a great path forward. We're really focused on what a future Indigenous research, ocean research call will look like. And that will be the opportunity to bring in communities, researchers, to do something pretty unique. We have really benefited from, we've got an Indigenous advisory committee that actually is not just kind of OFI, but bringing in perspectives from across our respective universities so that we get a fulsome view of actually what are the priorities of the communities and what would Indigenous businesses, communities, or governments want ocean research? What work would they like done? So it's a fabulous opportunity for us, and one like Melanie, you know, it's the way that we're oriented, and it's just going to yield tremendous benefits again to this ecosystem.
And of course, one of the most exciting things to happen in the last 5 or 10 years in ocean and economy in Nova Scotia has been the acquisition of Clearwater by Number 2 and Premium. So and really people may not know how innovation and science and technology focused Clearwater has been. So it's going to be really exciting to see how that continues and as we all partner. So I'm going to start with a question from Bert Lewis. What advice would you have for organizations outside of Halifax to get on side with these great upcoming opportunities? For example, the Strait of Canso, Mulgrave, and Port Hawkesbury are ideally located with deep ice-free harbors. I'm going to start with Melanie. Can you answer that question for us?
Sure, I think I'll be pretty short in that, Bert, I think you need to just reach out. And I think it's about finding solutions together. So, you know, what we know with our facility here is that access to water is so important for development, and access to the global community is really important, because most of the business that is happening with a lot of these companies is over 80% export. So you need to have those connections. So I think what I'd suggest, Bert, is just reach out to us, and you know, we're up for having those conversations and understanding how we can leverage what we've done and benefit a place like Port Hawkesbury.
Joseph Wheeler says, Catherine, so inspiring to hear your comments. Most countries miss their Paris Accord targets. What must happen at COP26 to put greater accountability in their commitments to what will clearly be more aggressive targets? And I'll add to that, and what role can the ocean play in that? You're on mute, I think. Yeah.
Classic. Sorry, and thank you very much for the question, Joseph. So I think Glasgow COP26 will be a little bit of a significant reality check, right? And you'll have big powers, like you'll have Joe Biden there for the States, very different than a previous American administration. You are going to have countries hopefully be very clear about what they can and can't accomplish. And you're quite right, this country has not met its targets. I think and again, the piece that we're advocating for is actually, I would hope Canada can bring forward to COP the other side of the equation, to talk about the chemistry and the significance of ocean carbon in the climate, global climate regime. That would be such an advent for global policymakers as they try to actually figure out what the gap is, like what's the delta, what do they really have to solve for? We need the baseline. And I actually truly hope that Canada will pick up this baton and take that into COP. That will force some very honest discussions among nations, you know, about theoretical targets that are based on models versus a real look at the global, the true state of the global carbon budget.
Excellent. So this is a question I think all of us are being asked to maybe give our view on this. Where is the massive opportunity in oceans? What is the massive opportunity? I'm going to start with Jennifer, Melanie, Catherine, and then I'll weigh in.
I think the massive opportunity is mitigation of impact of climate change. And that's almost a bit of a cop-out, because that could be everything.
Catherine's answer, that's not fair.
I know, but I think there's an element of anything that we can do to reduce the number of times. So for example, I'm going to take a research angle. If you're going to go out to an offshore site to leave some sensors in the water to collect data, if you can do that autonomously with a smaller vessel and do it without a bunch of people, and it's going to be faster and less impactful, that is fantastic, because you've reduced the amount of fossil fuels you're going to need, you've reduced the amount of people and possible harm to the ocean. If you can identify ways to optimize vessels so they don't strike whales as they're driving, they don't drive, you know what I mean, floating through the ocean. There's ways to avoid storms. I think it's one of these things where as much information and data and collaboration as we can have, there's massive opportunity in every single one of these silos or industries that you think within the sector. And I know I took the easy answer, sorry.
Melanie.
Well, I think it's really, it's the bigger picture answer, right? And so I'm going to say the same thing. So I think two big trends, if you will, that I'm seeing is that that decarbonization piece, if you will, and this is across the board. So and sustainability. So how are we using our resources, whether they be on land and the ocean, which, we still know very little about, to the point where it's about 5% of the ocean seabed has been explored to date. And it might be off by that, but it's less than double-digit numbers. Billions are going into investment in space research. We're probably not in the billions in the ocean space yet. It's a food source, it's a transportation corridor, and sort of. So I think that, to add on to what Jennifer said, that whole decarbonization requirements to ensure that our ocean, it remains a carbon sink as it has been. I think that's a massive opportunity. And second to that, which is another global trend, it's not so unique to this sector, but is digitization. So it's the AI, it's that how we're using data to operate very, very differently. And so, I've been in and out of the ocean sector, if you will, for 25 years. What I know for sure from my experience is that working in the ocean is high risk and very expensive, or has been very expensive. And what I get really excited about in the last couple of years is when I start seeing that now we can use robotics, machine learning, different sensing data to actually get the information that we couldn't before without sending large vessels out to water, without sending crews of 30 plus and putting them out of water. So the way that we're going to have to shift with this opportunity and think about how we operate is going to provide massive gains, not only from a sustainability point of view, but from a cost point of view in operations, from a safety and risk, from not having people out and working in the ocean in the same way that they did in the past, which is not necessarily sustainable. So I think that's, sort of that massive opportunity.
Catherine?
Yeah. Look, both Melanie and Jen have touched on my points. Where I am on the importance of a sustainable ocean. And when you think about setting up an economy based on it, keeping it sustainable keeps the economic base there. So that's kind of a no-brainer. I do think that the data that we get from the ocean will inform so many opportunities. I'm just going to end with a little vignette about the myriad of opportunities in the ocean that we have just not scratched the surface. And one of our partners institutions found an ocean microbe, and an enzyme from that ocean microbe was the compound used for the first COVID tests. So, think about global health, and the solution came from the ocean to figure out how to deal with a terrestrial issue. So that, many big inventions come from just science work. So it was incredible, but that's just a vignette about all the opportunities that are there. And Jeff, you're seeing them in companies, right?
That's right. And kind of connected to that, but I'm just going to go specific in a particular thing, which is, I think the autonomous and electric shipping is the massive opportunity. And there's so many massive opportunities, you can't, but I think there's a lot of expertise in autonomous underwater and scientific vehicles. What's happened with, the rise of electric and autonomous vehicles on the land. And I think we're just, we're where land-based cars and trucks were 10 years ago. We're just starting to get there. And I think an exciting opportunity for Halifax is just all the expertise with Jeff Don and his Tesla lab, and Novonix, which is now a $500 million company based out of Halifax. That's a battery company. A huge part of the electrification of shipping is going to be the battery components. So, we can double down on the science of that and how it actually works in a wet environment, which is different from a drier environment. and the computer vision and AI that Jennifer has been talking about, you know, to make sure that it's being done safely. So I just think it's a massive opportunity. I'm going to go to a question that we had around, and I'm going to go to Melanie. It's David Ford is asking about, you know, how do you encourage dual use technology for military and commercial? And, you know, also just building on that, what are you seeing as far as, you know, innovation that's happening related to, you know, the national shipbuilding project, the you know, huge amount of supply chain that we have here, and how that fits into the whole ecosystem, and, you know, how people can look, you know, if you're a startup, to both military and commercial applications.
Yeah, it's a great question, because it ties into a lot of what we've discussed. So the defense sector is a huge customer for Ocean Tech. So in Canada, in the US, there's massive contracts in the market to apply novel technology, to do R&D. So tremendous opportunity. The challenge, though, is that it's not an easy segment to get into. It's, you know, it takes a long time and so on. So I do think, I'm just going to, you know, kind of touch on the point, Catherine, the government as a procurer of these large military, whether it be ships or other procurement opportunities, have such a great opportunity to show leadership in adopting innovation. And you know, with the shipbuilding contract, which, you know, we've been benefited by in so many ways. So, you know, there's a value proposition attached to that large shipbuilding contract, and we've been a benefactor of that. We've worked with so many companies that are part of that supply chain, and they're all very innovative companies. So a big opportunity like that, a shipbuilding contract, this is tens of billions of dollars in Atlantic Canada. That's creating spin-offs. It's creating spin-offs, whether they're today in the supply chain or, you know, individuals that are part of the supply chain today are developing their own companies down the road just because they want to stay and live in Halifax and have their families here. There's talent attraction. There's people coming from all over the world to work in, you know, into a large contract on that, and they may stay and they may kind of migrate to other companies within the market. So I think that's going to play out really quite interesting over the next decade. And so how do you get it into commercial? I think, you know, we're starting to see some traction from D&D on being, you know, having these one-on-one conversations saying, this is what you could be doing. You could be applying innovation. And so we're starting to see a little window of opportunity there where they're looking at, okay, well, what does that mean? And of course there's DRDC, but, you know, when I think of the D&D side, which is maybe not just DRDC, like getting their people really engaged in innovation. So there's a little bit of window opportunity that we're seeing. And, you know, it's a factor of all these things coming together, why I believe that's happening. But, yeah, I don't think the answer is super clear for you, David, but there's some progress happening for sure.
Catherine, maybe you can just add on to that, given your experience in your previous lives.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I think about major Crown procurement, and I guess for my sins, I actually was part of, you know, the shipping file. And yeah, major Crown procurement in Canada is worth billions and billions of dollars. And it's expected that there are regional benefits. Again, in the ocean space, I think we are starting to really get the level of attention that we need to get more of the blue benefit, if you will, right? When you think about where government, the kinds of investments that are made. And I do think it is in the climate space, the blue tech absolutely has to be factored in. Jeff, I want to pick up on your point about the autonomous shipping, because you're quite right. I'm glad somebody else said it, because I think my notes were wrong. I thought it was like 90% of goods move by ocean. So between 80 or 90%. So the emissions, the waste, the impact on cetaceans and other sea life. The other thing that we haven't mentioned, just in terms of the blue economy, that's, people ask me about that often because that's a big, big, broad definition. The other opportunity in the ocean space, particularly this region, is tourism. And there are lots of opportunities that actually my colleagues in Caribbean countries, again, through the high level panel, are focused on that. There are big and different opportunities in that space as well. So we also have tourism tucked under that, it's, I think government can play a huge role and will, by the policy priorities, the decision, and the regulatory framework. That is what has spawned massive opportunities in the past, and it will in the future.
A lot of Silicon Valley was driven by US federal government procurement in the early days in the 50s. And
totally.
It's not just an overnight success story. It was 70 years of that. And we're going to do the same in the ocean. Joseph Wheeler, you appear to do your research like me. So his question is, Jennifer, really enjoyed your comments. If you Google ocean data, which I also do my research, there appears to be dozens and dozens of databases related to ocean data. Is there a way for either private or public sector organizations to apply AI to bring these disparate databases together to create greater focus and to provide ocean tech firms access to data to reduce product development cycles and other benefits? And Jennifer knows I'm a big fan of something called data trusts. So
yes.
Hopefully you'll use that term somehow in this answer.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Well, there's a couple of things here. So great question. So one of the things my dad always says, just because you can doesn't mean you should. So you could go and bring all of those data groups together, but what's the reason? So to Jeff's point, I might go and collect some really important data about an aquaculture site, and I keep really great information because I want to know the health of my fish. But maybe there's something else, we want to put a wind farm out adjacent to that. And some of the data I've collected could actually be really valuable to someone who wants to invest in a wind farm. That's where it's really important that that data trust came together and we could share information for like reasons or value of those. It could be multifaceted or multi-purposed. Sometimes what happens though is you don't always have access to the data, or it's not necessarily the right data. And I'm going to go to the Stella Maris project as one really important one. So Melanie's talking about an underwater system that is going to collect video, it's going to collect audio, it's going to collect a bunch of data that normally people would only collect one form of this data. They wouldn't bring it all together. And if you were going and making your own sensors or other type of equipment that went underwater, the only way you really get some of that data back is after it gets sold to your customer. And maybe you had an agreement that they'd be willing to give you some of that data back. So this is one of those things where something like this ecosystem we have here is brilliant, where we're going to have the opportunity to have companies not just test out and look and collect their own data and analyze it, but we have the chance to take students to show them real opportunity to look at data that Cove's collected. We're going to have novel data sets that have never existed in other places. So sometimes you have to go collect your own data, and that's not a bad thing either. But then the other times, if we could have great trust and partnerships, it could save a lot of money and a lot of time. We often need a lot of historical and seasonal data. So Cove is something to pay attention to in the next little while with the Stella Maris.
Sorry, I was muted there. Just picking up on one other, great question, because they say data is the new gold. But the other really exciting tech that we're seeing a lot in the shipping industry and other ocean industries is blockchain. Can you just briefly describe how that works in the ocean economy and what opportunities you see there?
So blockchain can be really valuable, but it depends on where it fits within the supply chain. So the whole goal is you have something and then there's a record tied to it and there's a public key that gets tied to it. So there's a trickle down eventually of the record, and it's a ledger, and we won't get into all the specifics, but essentially the whole concept is you now have a methodology to be able to track exactly where something came from and nobody can fake it. And so this is really important in certain situations. We've all heard stories of somebody eating sushi that it's not actually the type of fish they thought it was. Or people love to get like lobster that comes from certain locations, but you actually don't know where it's caught. So we have lots of opportunities to go and take this tracking to make it very clear and articulate of where things came from. It's really great from the aquaculture side of things. There's a lot of other applications we can think about in the future where some kinds of goods and services cross many hands and you can't track. one really interesting company like Sedna, who's a great company based out of Cove as well, that's an incredible startup, has been exploring some of these things as well. And they're talking about the whole management of supply chain. So I think aquaculture is the biggest push that we have to work through the adoption and understanding of how that blockchain can be applied.
Yeah, and I think of AI as the data allows us to do better prediction, and when you can do it much cheaper, right? So you can predict whether the weather will be this way or where the fish might be migrating, and blockchain can reduce the cost of verification, essentially make it simpler and easier to verify things. So what are those applications, whether it's in shipping goods from multiple different ships to a final destination, or traceability of seafood, or those types of things. So we're going to go with our final question, and I'm going to go to Melanie. David Forrest asks about the prospects of offshore wind in this region, or green hydrogen or blue hydrogen. And you're the most technical, I think, you and Jennifer are the most technical, but on the engineering side, I think you're the most technical. So we're going to throw that question to you.
Great. Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, David, for the question. So maybe I'll just start by, the offshore wind sector. So I've been involved in the offshore energy for renewable energy for probably over 15 years. The last 10 years in the offshore wind sector has just dramatically changed. And that's been the change because there's been governments mandating, regulating renewable energy. There's been a lot of operational efficiencies and knowledge that's been gained on how to actually operate these turbines in market. And what that means is now that the costs of offshore wind have just gone down significantly. And you see this with power purchase agreements now in New England that, just blow me away. So, so that market is accelerating really, really fast globally. What it means for us here in Nova Scotia, well, if I just think about our extended footprint here, for example, so a lot of the companies that we're working with at Cove are already doing work in offshore wind. So whether they're in the UK right now, I know a couple of vessels that are actually in New England right now, looking, doing some environmental assessment work for some of the big projects that are happening in New England. So there's some early movers that are already playing in the offshore wind market, not locally, unfortunately. So what does that mean for here in offshore wind? So I think, one of the challenges that we do have in Atlantic Canada is in Canada, we've got big hydro resources, we've got onshore wind, we've got land, and we believe that we've got an offshore wind resource south of Nova Scotia. And I say we believe because a lot of that information comes from data that was developed many years ago related to wave heights and whatnot. And we know that there's such a direct correlation with wind speeds, offshore wind speeds, and wave heights. So I think we really need to understand that resource a lot more, and we know that investment is going into this space globally. So we need to understand what that resource is for Nova Scotia and what it means from a broader perspective. Does that energy you talk about, could it be used for green hydrogen? How expensive will that be? Who's going to be the off-taker of that hydrogen? And are they willing to pay for that green hydrogen? So those are all really, really important questions that I think that we need to understand before we're in a position to say today that it's a market we need to tap into tomorrow and get that investment, because it's something that really has to be thoroughly looked at. But we know globally that decarbonization is happening, and countries are looking at ways to reduce their carbon footprint through energy.
So what a fantastic group, as Catherine said. I'm so proud of them, and I'm going to push it back to our host. But before that, I just want to recognize our friends at Cox and Palmer, who are not in the ocean sector, but have really focused on this as an area of growth. And I see Dan and Ian and Stephen and Marilyn on the phone. And so for any of those people on this call who want to learn more or see how there's an opportunity to participate, please reach out to any of us, and we're more than happy to. We were thrilled to share some of what's happening. Hopefully, you learned something and get the same excitement we do, and we're happy to discuss more. So back over to you, Farron.
All right. Well, thank you, Jeff, Melanie, Catherine, and Jennifer for this brilliant discussion today. Wow, like good time flies by so fast. It is so exciting to see the developments and the growth happening in the ocean sector right here in our province. I'd like to thank, again, our presenting partner, the Rowe School of Business and the Faculty of Management at Dalhousie University. And of course, I'd like to thank our host partner, Cox & Palmer. Thank you again for everyone for attending today. A recorded version will be available on the Chamber YouTube channel in the coming days. We hope to see you all again soon and have a great week.